These voluntary guidelines present a global consensus on norms, standards and principles of good governance on access to land, to forestry and to fisheries. This is the first time that the international community has agreed to set up these principles on responsible governance. Pressure on land is growing. A growing population needs more food. There is a need for more energy. So overall in the world you can see increased demand but decreasing supply of natural resources. And there is no internationally agreed binding agreement on how to deal with these natural resources. And therefore we are really proud to get a consensus on these norms and principles. It was only possible to develop these guidelines because we have undertaken a very broad participatory process. We had 15 regional conferences, more than 1,000 people from more than 150 countries participated, NGOs, technicians, government officials, private sector, and people from academia. So a very, very broad participatory process where in the end we could identify the main problems and the best possible solutions in dealing with land tenure for forestry and fisheries. If you consider 3 years long in an area where you have so many conflicts, you underestimate the problems. So from our perspective, it took the necessary time and it costed quite a lot of money to bring people from all over the world together to prepare a draft which has been negotiated by FAO's member countries. And this is really unique. 193 member countries have agreed on this set of principles. And this was only possible because we provided sound technical input and we had a broad participatory approach which took 3 years. These guidelines have to be implemented at the national level, and therefore we are looking for countries who want to really lead the implementation of the voluntary guidelines. This means we need a process of establishing national platforms to implement these guidelines. We need all stakeholders participating in this platform, governments, civil society, private sector, and of course we are looking for funding so that FAO can support the creation of these national platforms. This will take even more time than the development of the guidelines. We know that the poorest people and the most vulnerable groups feel the first and the most pressure when it comes to issues like land grabbing. And therefore, these voluntary guidelines protect human rights with a very clear focus on small-scale farmers, vulnerable groups, but also on women. And therefore, we consider these guidelines as an important contribution to achieve food security. The CFS is the platform where governments, civil society, NGOs and private sector are coming together. And the CFS established an open-ended working group where FAO's member countries, civil society and private sector worked over days and nights to agree on a consensus which will now be discussed and I hope finally decided in CFS. CFS, with its innovative form of working together, laid the foundation for the decision. These voluntary guidelines are laying out international agreed standards, norms and principles dealing with all issues related to tenure on land, forestry and fisheries. Land grabbing is part of it, but the guidelines are much broader. We are currently preparing technical implementation guidelines. These voluntary guidelines have to be translated into concrete country action. And here we have already started to discuss very sensitive issues like gender equality, questions like the rights of indigenous people. And these technical implementation guides have to be transformed to national policies. And therefore, the next step is the identification of countries who want to lead the implementation, and then FAO is ready to support these countries.